Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the USS Enterprise, boldly going where no warrior has ever gone before. Welcome, ladies, to my presentation today on the history of space travel. And for those of you that are not aware, that was the theme song to Star Trek, one of my favorite shows. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of space travel today. Um, it really begins. I mean, there was things happening before the 50s, but 50s was really where the space race began, right? So during the Cold War, the U.S. and it actually arose from the competition between the USA and the USSR, which is Russia, um, and they competed on everything, right? During that time, during this Cold War, from Olympic Games to the space race, right? The Russians actually began. They took the first step forward when they were the first to put a satellite in space. Right now, of course we have many satellites around space that help us get our cable and help us get our our phones working. Right. The Americans worried, of course, that there were that nuclear weapons could be sent into space. Right. So this Sputnik from 1957 took 98 minutes to orbit the world, and of course the U.S. became kind of worried about what's going to be going on, right? This picture right here is one of the world's most famous dogs. Her name is Laika, right? And so Laika was a stray Russian dog, and she was the first animal sent into space, right? So it was the first creature, to orbit space was a dog, right? That's a big step in the history of dogs. Unfortunately, she did die a few hours into the flight from overheating. Um, which was, of course, it's a shame. Yeah. Um, so it did prove though that animals could survive weightlessness in the launch, right? Which led to, of course, having humans eventually go, right? You also had American monkeys in space, right? Before humans could be sent, they had to send other animals, right? Gordo, the squirrel monkey, survived his first flight actually, but he died when his parachute did not open. So he survived the flight itself into space, but did not survive the way back. Abel, right, died the following month in Baker. They were the first animals to survive the first animals to survive space flight, right? And there's some video there if you wanna check that out. Yuri Gagarin, right? In 1961, Russia then kind of stepped up their game and they put the first man in space, right? The Soviet cosmonaut orbited the Earth for 118 minutes at 17,000 miles per hour. He was never allowed to fly again, right? But he has that distinction of being the first human being in space, right? Here's a picture of him. Now, the Vostok, right? The Vostok 1 again was was a capsule that the Russians launched as they stepped up their game in this Cold War space race, right? The first man on the moon, right, was a big event. Like people were watching it on TV. If you ask your grandparents and stuff, they'll tell you. The Russians put the first satellite, right, the first animal and man into space, but the Americans had to be the first to put the on the moon, right? They launched on July 16th, 1969. 60 million people watched. Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon, right? And the 21st of July, and you could find video of this everywhere, right? They spent 21 hours on the moon, 2.5 hours outside, and they returned to Earth on 24th of July, right? This is a picture there of the first team then to go, and it's Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, right? Their names are engraved now in history. Now, the Saturn B, the rocket that took Apollo 11 mission to the moon, is pictured here. The rocket broke into three parts, one with fuel, the command module, and the lunar module, right? Rockets only lasted for one mission. That's it. So part of the Saturn B is still floating actually through space, and part of it is at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, right? The capsule that came back. Okay. Think about all the science and all the math and the calculations that went into this, right? Some of you have seen Hidden Figures, and that's what this is about, right? So when we're talking about STEM, we're talking about the importance of STEM careers. This is something that humankind has been able to accomplish through their collaborative efforts in math and in science, and just creativity, right? Because there's an art to this as well. Buzz Aldrin poses here for a picture that Neil Armstrong can be seen in his visor. Like you could, if you look at his visor, the reflection, you could see him taking a picture, right? He stands beside the U.S. flag here, and of course there is no wind, so that flag's still standing, looking just like that, right? It's not flipping in the air because there's no atmosphere there, right? Also, you could see their prints there at the bottom, right? Those are still up there because again, you don't have wind blowing them away. Aldrin doing an experiment in the lunar module. The lunar module's in the. I mean, he's doing an experiment, and you could see a lunar module in the background. Imagine also how the courage these astronauts had. I mean, they were the first in the moon without guarantee, really. I mean, they were trusting that the people that worked on this had their calculations correct. Otherwise, they would have gone stuck up there, right? Here's the lunar module, the Eagle, returning to the command module. The Columbia, the Earth, and the moon can be seen in the background. You see the moon, how beautiful it looks, and the Earth just rising back there. Beautiful, right? The Columbia crashed in the Pacific Ocean, and the astronauts were rescued by American frogmen. They're just sailors, right? The astronauts were quarantined for 3 weeks in case they had brought back some alien disease, right? So, we're talking today about being quarantined because of coronavirus. We weren't sure if they would have brought back something that would be harmful to us, so they were quarantined. Not in that little space, by the way, okay? They had a bigger area inside that, okay? Here's the first pictures of Mars. The American Viking 1 was a spacecraft that captured the images of the red planet, right? It actually worked until 1982 when NASA scientists made a mistake reprogramming the batteries, and unfortunately it died. But look at the terrain on Mars and how amazing it must have been, right? You have the Voyager 1 and 2, 1977, and these two spacecrafts were sent into space, right? They were sent at a time when the planets were almost aligned, right? And it actually this caused to speed them up. Here are some pictures from 1980 from the Voyager 1. It took photos of Saturn, right? And you could see Titan, one of Saturn's moons, actually has an atmosphere. So we've discovered these great things from these crafts that we've sent out into space, right? To go into the deeper regions of space and take amazing images like this, right? So the space shuttle then in 1981 was an important advancement in the space race and in the space exploration. It replaced the rocket because most of it was reusable. There are 5 space shuttles, right? The Columbia, the Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour, right? The Columbia, of course, was destroyed. Unfortunately, in 2003, it actually was destroyed, and my daughter was born that day. And of course, the Challenger exploded in 1986. I was sophomore in high school, and I remember specifically when the announcement came on board. I went home and I watched CNN for hours on end, right? So the Space Shuttle Atlantis taking off at sunset. This is at the top of the smoke. The smoke is plume is red, right? And you could see there the discovery in 2006, right? Voyager 2 has passed Uranus in 1986. A day was found to be 17 hours and 14 minutes long, right? And we also found out from this trips there that Uranus actually has its orbit is 84 Earth years. As we talked about a little about the Challenger 1986, I was in high school that day. Seven died in the Challenger, including a civilian teacher that had gained her way into the shuttle. It was the second space shuttle, and it exploded due to faulty O-rings, right, and the cold temperatures out in space, right. It was a real tragic event, right. In 1989, Voyager 2 actually reached Neptune, right. It appears blue because of its methane atmosphere. That's why it looks that way. And you could see a storm brewing there. There's a blue storm there. There's storms in some of these planets, but you could kind of see the blue storm right there, right? You also had in 1990 the invention of the Hubble telescope, right? And it can see actually objects 14 billion years ago. Uh, it had, I mean, away. Sorry about that. It can be repaired in space. I know it had to be repaired in 1993, and it has produced images of stars being born and stars dying. If you haven't seen some of these, you have to go and look, see if you could find a book or images online. They are just amazing. Look, this is the Eagle Nebula. It is 7,000 light years away. Isn't it beautiful? Right? These are pictures from the Hubble telescope. It almost looked like three, I don't know, like I don't know, creatures rising right in space. Beautiful, right? This is a Horsehead Nebula, and it's 15,000 light years away, right? And by that means is that it would take light 15,000 years to get there. So it is very far away. But it does look like a horsehead, doesn't it? All right. And this is known as the Cat's Eye Nebula, right? And this is 3.3 kilo light years away. Very, 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 very far away, right? The Andromeda Galaxy, it's a picture here, right? We had the Columbia in 2003 that burned upon re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. I remember it was a tragic event again, and I remember well because my daughter was born on that day. A ceramic heat towel had become loose on takeoff. Something that small, that precise. This has to be so precise what they do, guys. 7 astronauts were killed, right? The debris from the explosion landed in cars, parks, forests, and even in a dentist's office, right? Columbia was launched 22 years ago as the first space shuttle. Right here's a picture of it. Very, this might be Cape Canaveral, I guess. Very stunning, right? So ceramic tiles are on the underside of the shuttle, right? And they are heat proof. They create a heat proof shield, right? Because we know a ceramic a heat conductor, right? Or is it not? Right. So friction from the air molecules heats the shuttle to 15,000 degrees Celsius. That's why you need to have those ceramic tiles that are heat proof at the bottom. And if any of them break off, it creates a problem, right? Because there's fuel and things there that can ignite. We talked about the other day about how when meteors enter the Earth's atmosphere, they burn up because of that air friction that's being created. I mean, the same thing happens to anything that re-enters the Earth, including the space shuttle, right? And that was it. That is the history of space travel from 1957 to 2006. I hope you enjoyed our journey. I will talk to you later. Bye bye.